My name is Sarah Collins, 34 years old. The morning light sliced across the general's mahogany desk, bright as a blade, glinting off metals and polished brass nameplates, as if the room itself had been inspected and cleared for perfection. My boots ticked a steady rhythm over the carpet, the kind of rhythm that keeps you honest. I was halfway through my checklist, standard base inspection, nothing personal, when my eyes landed on a photograph and everything I believed about discipline, duty, and distance collapsed in a heartbeat. A little girl, maybe 6, brown curls, blue eyes so bright they looked almost familiar, the kind of blue that catches you before you know you're looking. The frame was silver, engraved with a single word, Emily. She was smiling, clutching a small stuffed marine bear to her chest like a secret she wouldn't let go. The inspection folder slipped from my hand and fanned papers across the carpet. The clock on the wall kept ticking, calm and indifferent, while my pulse hammered loud enough to drown it out. "Something wrong, Major Collins?" The general's voice cut clean through the room, command, sharpened by caution. I forced a swallow, felt it hitch. "Sir, this girl, this child in the photo." I pointed toward the desk and hated that my hand trembled despite all the training that had taught me not to. He stepped forward, curious at first, then tense in a way I recognized from briefings that turned bad. "What about her?" The word stuck in my throat. I took a breath, braced for impact. "She lived with me, at St. Mary's Orphanage in Waco." His eyes widened, the color leached from his face, not fast, but in a tide that had nowhere else to go. "You mean my missing daughter?" He looked at me as if I'd dragged a ghost into broad daylight. I have stared down sandstorms and mortar fire, walked casualty lists in blackout rooms, held steady through chaos. Heartbreak is louder. I felt it in the silence between us, heavier than any battlefield I've crossed. That morning had started like any other. Coffee at 0600, uniform pressed, inspection orders folded crisply in my breast pocket. I'd been assigned to Fort Hood for a 3-month internal audit. Every week a new department, every Friday a report, and a rule I kept close because it kept me sane: professional distance. Keep emotion out of the job. But life has a way of stepping over rules like they're chalk lines that rain can take. The general, Robert Alden, was known across the Corps. Perfect posture, precise words, the kind of leader who commanded silence just by entering it. I'd admired him once from afar as a cadet. Now I stood in his office shaking like a recruit who'd heard her name and not the charge. He gestured to the chair. "Tell me exactly what you mean, Major." I sat, spine rigid. "Sir, that girl, Emily, you called her that. I knew her as Lily. We grew up together at St. Mary's. She arrived when we were 6, maybe a little younger, quiet, always humming when she was afraid." His jaw tightened. "How can that be possible? Emily was taken from a park in Dallas 20 years ago. She was 4. I met his gaze. "Then she must have been found, sir. Found and renamed." The office clock resumed its steady metronome in the silence that followed. He walked to the window and stared out at the Texas light as if it might answer. "I searched for years," he said finally, voice lower, the words fighting their way out. "Private investigators, federal channels, nothing. My wife died believing our daughter was dead." He turned back, eyes wet but steady. "And now you tell me she lived." "I can't be sure," I said, hating the qualifier, needing the truth. "But those eyes, I'd stake my life on it." "Tell me about her. What do you remember?" So I did. I told him about Lily's soft laugh, the way she traced airplane shapes in the dust on our dormitory windows, the way she lined up crayons before she colored, as if order could keep the world from shifting under her feet. I told him how she stayed awake to comfort the little ones when the nightmares came like trains, and how she had a tiny crescent birthmark near her neck, no bigger than a thumbnail, but unmistakable. His hand rose to his chest as if reaching for a memory he'd carried too long. Emily had the same mark. He sank into his chair. For a moment, the general's rank sat on the desk like just another piece of metal. "If you're right, if my daughter was alive all these years, then someone kept her from us." The steel returned to his tone. "And I intend to find out who." "With respect, sir," I said carefully, "this might go deeper than either of us think. Adoption files, sealed transfers, things that vanish if you look wrong at them. It won't be easy." "You're a Marine, aren't you?" "Yes, sir." "Then we do not quit when something isn't easy." Simple words. Firm. They lit something in me I hadn't let myself feel in years. Not rage, exactly, but a righteous heat that knows where to go. When I left his office, the sun outside felt hotter, the air thicker. My boots kept their rhythm, my mind didn't. The photograph replayed every third step. Could it be her? Lily, who split a peanut butter sandwich with me because I told her I hated the taste of hunger. Lily, who whispered, "Someday we'll both get out," like a promise you say against the dark. The last time I saw her, we were 12. I'd been adopted by a family in Dallas, promised a new start, a different name for the same ribs. She hugged me, tears drawn in bright lines down her cheeks. "Write to me," she said. I promised I would. I never did. Duty carried me far, but guilt travels faster than deployment. That night I sat in my quarters, the moon a faint reflection in the shine of my medals. They felt lighter, or emptier. The Corps had taught me about loyalty and courage, but there are battles no ribbon covers, fought not for country, but for truth, the kind that waits quietly until someone dares to look. I opened my laptop, typed St. Mary's Orphanage Waco TX, and pressed enter. Morning came with the smell of wet asphalt. The flag above headquarters tugged at its halyard like it had somewhere to be. I reached the general's office before sunrise. He was already there by the window, uniform perfect, eyes not. "Major Collins," he said softly. "Close the door." I did. "You said you knew my daughter as Lily," he continued. "Start at the beginning." I folded my hands in my lap like I'd done in front of a disciplinary board, except this wasn't discipline, and no one here had done anything wrong except the people who had. "She arrived when I was 6. Didn't talk much the first weeks. The sister said she was found near a gas station outside Waco. No last name. They called her Lily because there was a flower stitched on her jacket." He breathed out something like a laugh that hurt. "Emily loved lilies. She picked them for her mother after church." His silence stretched, dense and living. "Go on." "She was kind," I said, and felt how small the word was for what I meant. "Fixed other kids' toys, gave away food, stayed awake to sing when the littles cried. The staff said something bad had happened before she came, but she smiled anyway." He rubbed his temples, a man bracing beneath an old weight. "I spent 20 years wondering if she was alive, and you're telling me she was smiling in an orphanage 3 hours away." "I didn't know who she was," I said, each word its own apology. "I swear I didn't." "Of course you didn't," he answered, voice finding its spine again. "You were a child." He straightened. Command settled on him like a familiar coat. "Do you still have contact with the orphanage?" "I haven't been back since I enlisted, but I can go." "Do it discreetly," he said. "No press, no channels. If someone hid her, I don't trust bureaucracy to tell me the truth." "I'll need authorization." "I'll handle the paper. You handle the truth." He opened a drawer and slid an old envelope across the desk. Inside was a faded photo, a young officer and his wife, a little girl with a toy airplane, those eyes again, clear as a sky you pray for. "Keep it," he said, "in case you need proof." When I stepped outside, the base felt quieter, as if the buildings had heard and chosen to stand still. The drive out of the gate stretched long, a ribbon of road, unspooling 20 years of distance. Somewhere between the guardhouse and the highway, a thought crystallized so sharply I could feel its edges. Professional distance is a luxury. Some truths don't let you keep it. I pulled over and texted him an update I didn't send. "I'm in." Instead, I typed to myself, a habit I'd picked up on deployments when letters home had to wait. "Find Lily. Find Emily. Find the seam where the lie was sown." Back in my quarters, I laid out a plan the way we lay out an op. Questions first, then paths, then contingencies. Who authorized a transfer? Where did the file go? Why would anyone move a child off the grid and rename her as if grief were a ledger you could zero out? Names floated up from the core like oil from deep water, men who had power and friends who liked that power fed. Harold Vance was one of them. So was every officer who owed him a favor they hadn't paid yet. Between keystrokes, a whisper threaded the back of my mind, one I couldn't tell if I'd heard or invented. Some ghosts wear uniforms. I closed my laptop. I checked my sidearm. I checked the photo. I let the silence of the room settle until my breathing found it. Truth deserves daylight, but first you walk through dark corridors to switch on what needs to be seen. I holstered the truth I had, thin and bright as a blade, and I stood up. The mission had begun. The road to Waco stretched out like a scar through the Texas plains. The sun rose behind me, pouring a pale gold over cracked asphalt and rusted fences. Every mile between Fort Hood and St. Mary's felt like a year stripped from my life, thick with silence, memory, and questions that had nowhere to rest. I hadn't been back since I was 12, since the day they told me I was getting a real home. I used to think that meant safety. Now I knew better. The orphanage sat at the edge of town, smaller than I remembered. The red brick walls had faded, vines curling up the sides like they were trying to pull the building back into the earth. The iron gate creaked when I pushed it open. The sign above the entrance still read, St. Mary's Home for Children. The paint peeling so badly the name looked half erased, like everything else that came from this place. Inside, the smell hit me first. Floor wax, dust, and something faintly sweet. Old flowers maybe, or time itself. The hallways were the same long stretch of beige walls, lined with faded bulletin boards and children's drawings. My boots echoed as I walked, and with every step, the years folded back. I could almost hear our laughter from decades ago, Lily's hum, the scrape of chairs during supper, the bell calling us to prayer. Sarah Collins, a voice called softly from behind me. I turned, and my heart caught. Sister Agnes stood there, her frame smaller, her face lined like the pages of a book that had been read too many times, but her eyes, they were the same, kind, sharp, and knowing. Sister, I breathed, it's been a long time. She smiled, and the corners of her eyes crinkled. I thought I recognized those eyes. You've grown into quite the soldier. She touched my uniform sleeve with a trembling hand. Still trying to earn your keep? I managed a half smile. Something like that. Her gaze lingered, curious, then wary. You're not here for inspection, are you? No, sister. My throat tightened. This is personal. Her face changed, not surprised, not afraid, but sad, as if she'd been waiting for this day. I thought so, she said. You've got that look, like you're about to dig up ghosts. I need to ask you about a girl, I said quietly. Her name here was Lily. Brown curls, blue eyes, a small crescent birthmark on her neck. Sister Agnes's expression softened, and the years seemed to fade for a moment. Oh, I remember her, she whispered. Sweet child, gentle spirit, always drawing flowers and airplanes. She cried for her father every night when she first arrived. After a year, she stopped. My pulse picked up. What happened to her? The sister sighed, the sound of old regret. She was transferred. That's what the paperwork said. Houston Foster Care Program, 2006. New family, supposedly. But we never got confirmation. Those were chaotic years. Files went missing, programs changed names, and sometimes the children did too. Do you still have her file? I asked. Sister Agnes nodded slowly. What's left of it? We lost most records in the flood 10 years ago. But if anything survived, it's in the basement storage. She gestured down the corridor. Come with me. We descended into a low-ceilinged hallway where the air grew cooler and thick with mildew. Rows of metal shelves lined the room, stacked with water-damaged boxes labeled in fading marker, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007. She reached for one marked 2006, 2007 and set it on a table. Dust rose like breath in the air. Inside were folders swollen with damp edges and curling photographs. There, she said, handing me a thin, brown folder. That's hers. I opened it carefully. Inside were a few surviving documents. A vaccination record, a short intake note, a faded black and white photo of Lily. Her smile was smaller here, guarded, as if the world had already warned her not to trust it. On the back, in Sister Agnes's neat handwriting, I read, Transferred by request of State Social Services. Case ID 77HC. I felt my stomach drop. Case ID 77HC, I murmured. Who approved the transfer? The sister frowned, thinking. I don't remember his name. He wasn't one of ours. Military, maybe. He wore a badge, not a collar. I assumed he was with the relief program. Relief program? I asked sharply. Yes, he said it was part of an emergency relocation after a hurricane. She shook her head. We didn't question it. We thought it was safe. There was no hurricane in Texas that year, I whispered. Her brow furrowed. Are you sure? I'm sure. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the silence. Someone used military credentials, I said finally, my voice low, to move her off the record. Sister Agnes crossed herself. Lord help us. I slipped the folder into my bag. Thank you, sister. You've helped more than you know. As I turned to leave, she touched my arm gently. Sarah, she said, you were one of the good ones. You always wanted to protect people. But some things... She hesitated, her eyes glistening. Some truths don't stay buried because they're too dangerous. They stay buried because someone powerful wants them to. Her words followed me out into the daylight like a shadow I couldn't shake. The sun was beginning to set, throwing long red streaks across the courtyard. The wind carried the faint echo of children's laughter, or maybe it was just my memory playing tricks again. I stood by the rusted gate, looking back at the building, and whispered, I'll find her, sister. I swear I will. I started my car, the old engine coughing awake, and checked my phone. A new message blinked on the screen. From General Alden. Keep me updated. I've reopened my daughter's case file. And Major, be careful who you talk to. Some ghosts wear uniforms. I looked up at the orphanage one last time, the red bricks glowing in the dying light. Some ghosts wear uniforms. He was right, and I was about to chase one. The drive back was long and silent. The case file sat on the passenger seat, a small, crumbling thing with the word confidential stamped in fading red ink across the top. I'd carried classified intelligence before, orders, field reports, casualty data, but none of it had ever felt this heavy. Somewhere between Waco and the base, the sun dipped below the horizon, and I caught my reflection in the glass. The face staring back at me wasn't just Major Collins anymore. It was Sarah, the orphan who used to believe family was something you earned by being good enough to keep. When I got back to Fort Hood, the sky was a deep violet. I parked near my quarters and sat there for a moment, the hum of the cooling engine filling the silence. I pulled out my notebook and wrote 3 words across the page in clean, deliberate ink. Find the truth. I flipped open the folder again, tracing the ink of that one haunting code, 77HC. It felt less like a number and more like a door waiting to be opened. I powered up my laptop and sent an encrypted message to someone who owed me a favor. Captain Elena Brooks, Pentagon JAG, office. We'd served together in Okinawa, shared too many bad cups of coffee and worse secrets. Need access to restricted relocation archives. 2006. Code 77HC. Possible military involvement. Quiet request. Her reply came 5 minutes later. You realize this could be above clearance, right? Then find someone whose clearance isn't. I hesitated before sending it, my cursor blinking like a pulse. Then I saw Lily's smile in that faded photograph, and I hit send. I leaned back in my chair, exhaustion creeping in behind my eyes. Outside, the base was settling into night. Lights flickered across the tarmac like restless stars. Somewhere, far away, an aircraft rumbled over the horizon. The sound filled the silence like a promise, one I wasn't sure I could keep, but knew I had to try. Tomorrow, I'd start asking the questions no one wanted answered. Tomorrow, I'd follow the trail wherever it led, even if it led straight into the fire. Because if the system had buried Lily to protect its own, I was ready to dig until it burned. By dawn, I was already in my car. The file from St. Mary's sat on the passenger seat, its worn edges flapping slightly every time I hit a bump. The sky ahead was still gray, the kind of color that doesn't commit to morning or night. My GPS said the drive to Georgetown would take just over an hour. I memorized the address before shutting it off. Colonel Michael Matthews, retired, U.S. Army. The closer I got, the quieter the world seemed to become. Wide lawns replaced fields, and rows of mailboxes stood in perfect suburban symmetry. I parked across from a tidy one-story house with a white porch and a flag hanging limp in the still air. On the surface, it looked ordinary, peaceful even, but something in me braced, the same way I used to before stepping into a compound that looked too calm. I took a slow breath and knocked. The door opened after a pause. Colonel Matthews stood there, tall, trim, late 70s maybe, but still carrying himself like a soldier who refused to surrender to time. His eyes, however, betrayed exhaustion, the kind that doesn't come from age, but from years of keeping secrets. Major Collins, he said when I introduced myself. His voice was gravel and steel. I retired a long time ago. What's this about? Relocation orders, I said, keeping my tone even. Texas region. 2006. A little girl transferred from St. Mary's Orphanage to Houston foster care. Case ID 77HC. The reaction was almost invisible, a twitch in his jaw, a tiny tightening around the eyes. But I'd been trained to read micro-expressions. I saw it. He knew. He stepped back. You'll have to be more specific. I think you already know, I replied quietly. She was 6, brown curls, blue eyes. The silence stretched. Then he sighed, a deep, weary sound that deflated the air between us. You'd better come in. The living room smelled of lemon polish and old smoke. Framed commendations lined the walls beside photos of Matthews in uniform with other officers. Younger, prouder men who probably believed their orders would never come back to haunt them. He motioned toward a chair. Can I offer you something? Coffee? Whiskey? Just the truth, I said. He chuckled softly. You sound like I did once. I waited. Silence can be a weapon, and I let it do the work. Finally, he poured himself a drink, hands shaking just enough to clink the ice. That file, he said slowly, it should have stayed buried. So it exists. He didn't deny it. He just stared into the glass. You're chasing something that will break a lot of people if you dig too deep, Major. Then maybe they need breaking. He smiled, sad and tired. You sound like my wife. She used to say truth is only brave until it's inconvenient. Was it your idea to move her? He looked up sharply. No, orders came from above. I was told it was for national security. I frowned. She was a child. His voice rose, just a fraction. Not my decision. My job was to follow through. Whose decision then? He hesitated. The old soldier in him fought the human being, and for a moment I saw both sides battling behind his eyes. Then he exhaled. The request came through a classified channel, an old defense seal, Office of Strategic Infrastructure. You won't find anything online. They wiped it clean. He took a long sip and muttered almost to himself, That girl, she looked terrified when they came. Kept asking for someone named Tessa. My throat closed. That was me. He froze, glass halfway to his lips. Then he set it down slowly. You already know too much. I leaned forward. You said they came who? 2 men, he said quietly. Civilian clothes, military posture. I didn't ask questions I couldn't afford to answer, but I remember the badge on their credentials. Defense Logistics Division. That's Vance's unit, I said under my breath. He didn't reply, just stared past me toward the framed flag folded in a triangle on his shelf. Be careful who you serve, Major. Some commands come from men who've forgotten what honor means. He stood abruptly, the conversation over, or maybe he just couldn't stand to hold it anymore. I did what I was told. I told myself it was mercy. Maybe it was cowardice. I rose too. You can still do the right thing, Colonel. He gave a bitter laugh. The right thing? That depends on who's writing history. I stepped closer, lowered my voice. Tell me who gave the order. He looked me dead in the eye, and for the first time I saw fear there, real fear. Harold Vance, he said finally. Now an undersecretary in Washington. Back then, he was a colonel with enough friends to move mountains and bury bodies beneath them. The room seemed to shrink. You signed her life away for him. I signed a paper I wasn't allowed to read, he said sharply. Don't make me your villain, Major. We all served something once. I wanted to yell, to accuse him, but there was no satisfaction in it. Only the quiet truth of 2 soldiers sitting on opposite sides of the same war. I pulled a small voice recorder from my jacket and placed it on the table. Say that again, for the record. He stared at the blinking red light, then shook his head. You think a confession changes anything? Vance still sits in an office high enough to decide which truths survive. Then help me make him answer for it. He stared for a long moment. The glass trembled in his hand, and then he nodded once, barely perceptible. You'll find what you're looking for in the logistics archives. Houston branch. Box 47C. I can't get you in, but you can. He reached into a drawer, took out a folded piece of paper, and slid it across the table, a keycard taped to it. This will work once. Don't come back here after you use it. I tucked it into my jacket. Thank you, Colonel. He gave a thin, humorless smile. Don't thank me. Just pray I never see that girl's eyes again in my sleep. When I stepped outside, the air was hotter than it should have been for morning. The sunlight burned white on the asphalt, and somewhere nearby, a lawn sprinkler clicked in slow rhythm. I stood there a moment, staring at the quiet little house that hid so much rot behind its perfect porch. The keycard felt heavy in my pocket. One use, one chance. Maybe one step closer to the truth. Back in my car, I called General Alden. He picked up on the second ring. Collins? I found the man who signed the transfer, Matthews. And? He says he acted under orders. The authorization came from Harold Vance, Strategic Infrastructure Division. A long pause. I could hear the faint sound of him pacing. Vance, he repeated, his voice low. I suspected. He was in procurement when Emily disappeared. We had differences. What kind? The kind that make enemies, Alden said grimly. Be careful, Major. If Vance's fingerprints are on this, you're not just chasing a missing person, you're chasing a classified operation. Understood, sir. Keep me informed. And Collins, watch your six. The line clicked dead. I drove back toward base with the air conditioning on full, but sweat still ran down my back. Every instinct I had told me I'd just crossed an invisible line, one that didn't let people come back. When I reached Fort Hood, the sky was gathering clouds. The wind picked up, carrying that metallic scent that comes right before a storm. I parked near the hangars and sat for a while, engine off, listening to the hum of the world shifting gears. Some commands come from men who've forgotten what honor means. Matthews's words replayed in my mind like a warning carved into stone. I opened my laptop and began digging. Vance's service years, Defense Logistics Archives, FEMA relocation codes. Buried deep in a declassified list of disaster operations, I found a memo tagged Confidential, Infrastructure Recovery Operations, July 2006. The signature line, M. Matthews, DLD. And below it, 3 small initials in red ink, HV. Harold Vance. My breath caught. He'd signed off on a dead program. I sent an encrypted file to Captain Brooks. Found internal memo, referencing case ID 77HC. Possible illegal reactivation of terminated defense directive. Verify origin, HV. Her reply came minutes later. You realize this isn't a ghost hunt anymore, right? This is treason-level territory. Then maybe it's time someone exorcised a few ghosts, I wrote back. The thunder cracked outside, shaking the glass. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the rain lash against the barracks, thinking of Lily's small hands pressed against orphanage glass, tracing airplanes in the dust. She'd always wanted to fly, to be free. Tomorrow, I'd go to Houston. Tomorrow, I'd open Box 47C, and maybe, just maybe, I'd find the truth that everyone else was afraid to see. The rain had stopped by the time I hit the highway. The storm had rinsed the world clean, leaving the air heavy and metallic, like the moment after a gunshot. The keycard Colonel Matthews had given me sat on the seat beside me, catching the morning light through the windshield. I couldn't stop glancing at it. One swipe, one chance. Houston rose from the distance like a mirage, steel and glass, and all the secrets a city can hide. The address written on the paper led me to an industrial district on the south side, where the skyline disappeared into warehouses and chain-link fences. A faded sign read, Federal Logistics Storage Facility. No guards, no cameras, no movement. Just a keypad, a locked gate, and that keycard in my palm, slick with sweat. I swiped it. The red light blinked once, then turned green. The gate unlocked with a soft click. Inside, the air smelled like dust and rusted metal. The hall stretched long and narrow, lined with identical gray doors marked with faded numbers. My footsteps echoed down the corridor, each one a warning I ignored. I passed 43A, 45B, 46C, then stopped at 47C. The door was ordinary, the kind you'd overlook if you didn't know it held a ghost. I took a breath and swiped the card. The light turned green again, and the lock disengaged. The room was darker than I expected. Rows of shelves, stacked with cardboard boxes, stretched toward the far wall. Some were labeled with old FEMA seals. Others bore military stamps half scraped away. The air was thick with neglect. I found box 47C on the bottom shelf. My hands shook slightly as I pulled it free and set it on the table. It was heavier than I expected. I peeled away the tape, opened the lid, and stared. Files. Hundreds of them. Folders stamped with words like disaster relief, evacuation authorization, child relocation. But one folder stood out, newer, thinner, a single red line drawn across the top. ID 2N7L, FEMA relocation. I opened it. The first page was a birth record. Female, approximate age 6, no last name. Found outside Waco, Texas. Transferred to St. Mary's Orphanage. The next page was a psychological assessment. It described the child as highly adaptable, emotionally stable, low risk for reintegration. Like she was an experiment, not a person. My stomach turned. Then came a line that froze my blood. Authorized relocation to Houston foster system under directive HVTX Ops. Vance, it was his code. I flipped to the last page. A photograph fell out. A little girl clutching a stuffed bear, her curls tangled, her blue eyes wide and searching. Lily. Emily. I pressed my fingers to the picture as if touching it could make time rewind. The final document was stamped classified. It carried a signature, approved by Harold Vance, Deputy Director, Strategic Infrastructure Division. Proof. I snapped photos of every page, every signature, every seal. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. 2 decades of silence were finally breaking open. I was about to close the box when a sound behind me made me freeze, the faint metallic click of a door latch. I turned slowly. A man stood at the entrance, mid-40s, trim suit, crew cut, cold, expressionless eyes. Major Collins, he said evenly, you shouldn't be here. My fingers brushed the inside of my jacket where my ID rested. Who are you? He held up a badge. Department of Defense Security Division, Agent Callahan. You accessed a restricted facility using an invalid key card. Invalid? I asked carefully. That card belonged to Colonel Matthews, he said, stepping closer. He's now under federal review for unauthorized disclosure of classified material. Convenient timing, I said. His smile was paper thin. Turn over the file, Major. I'll forget this breach ever happened. I met his gaze. Not going to happen. He sighed, the sound almost weary. You think you're protecting something noble? You're not. That file is sealed for a reason. Because it's evidence of a crime. He took another step forward, his shoes silent against the concrete. You think the system will side with you? You're one officer, one voice, against the Pentagon. I've been outnumbered before. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe. Or regret. You don't understand what you've opened, he said softly. This isn't about one child. It never was, and then tell me what it's about. But he didn't. He turned, his voice low as he walked away. You'll find out soon enough. But by then, Major, it'll be too late. The door slammed. The silence left behind was louder than gunfire. I stood there, heart pounding, then reached into my jacket pocket and pressed stop on my phone. The voice recorder had caught everything. His words, his threat, his admission. I backed out of the room, closed the box, and locked the door behind me. By the time I reached my car, the sky had turned gray again. I drove until I found a quiet diner on the outskirts of the city. I parked where I could see both exits. Inside, the place smelled of coffee and rain-soaked asphalt. I ordered black coffee, opened my laptop, and began uploading the photos to an encrypted cloud drive. Then I sent copies to Captain Brooks and to a private secure folder I'd kept since my deployments. When the last file uploaded, I exhaled for the first time in an hour. My phone buzzed, a new message from an unknown number. You're not safe. Get out of Houston. No name, no signature, just that. I looked out the diner window. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a single black sedan parked across the street. Its windows were tinted. I stared at it until the waitress refilled my cup. When I looked again, it was gone. By midnight, I'd checked into a cheap motel outside Katy. The sheets smelled of detergent and rust, but anonymity was the only luxury I wanted. I locked the door, set my service weapon on the nightstand, and took the photograph of Lily from my pocket. Her smile looked different now, sadder, older. Somewhere she was alive, living under another name, another lie. I picked up my phone and called Captain Brooks. She answered on the second ring, her voice low. You really like playing with fire, don't you, Sarah? I found the proof, I said. Vance authorized the relocation. I've got the signed memo. Jesus, she whispered. You realize what this means? It means a man in uniform used a government program to erase a child's life. She hesitated. What are you going to do now? I stared at the rain-slick parking lot outside. Whatever it takes to bring her home. The line was silent for a moment. Then Brooks said, Be careful. If Vance is involved, he won't let this go quietly. Neither will I. When I hung up, the motel room felt too small, the air too still. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling fan turning slow circles, listening to the hum. For 20 years, Lily had been a ghost. Now the people who made her one were starting to move. And so was I. The morning light crept through the blinds like an unwanted guest. I hadn't slept more than an hour. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photograph. Lily's face staring up from the file, smiling at a future someone had stolen from her. By the time the sun rose, my decision was made. I packed, checked out, and drove straight back to Georgetown. Colonel Matthews hadn't returned my calls since I'd left his house with the key card, and now every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong. The closer I got, the heavier that feeling became, like gravity had chosen a side. When I pulled up to his street, everything looked the same. The sprinklers clicked rhythmically, the neighbors' flags fluttered in the breeze. Normal. Too normal. The blinds in his front window were drawn. No movement. No sound. I knocked once. Twice. Nothing. The third time, the door creaked open an inch, just enough to reveal darkness inside. "Colonel Matthews?" My voice barely broke the still air. "It's Major Collins." Silence. I drew my sidearm and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Bourbon, stale air, and something else, metallic and final. The living room was dim, lit only by the thin daylight bleeding through the blinds. A lamp was knocked over. A picture frame shattered on the floor. Matthews sat slumped in his armchair, his head tilted back, eyes closed. An empty pill bottle rested on the side table beside an untouched glass of water. I checked his pulse, but I already knew. Nothing. "God," I whispered. Detective Ramos from Houston PD arrived an hour later, called in by Captain Brooks when she couldn't reach me. He was tall, steady, with the weary calm of a man who'd seen too many endings. As the coroner's team worked quietly behind us, he crouched beside me. "Suicide?" he asked. "Maybe," I said, "but it's too neat, too soon." Ramos nodded. "You think someone helped him along?" "I think someone silenced him." He picked up a folded piece of paper from the table, half tucked beneath the whiskey glass. 4 words written in shaky pen. "I tried to warn you." My stomach tightened. Ramos slid the note into an evidence bag. "You knew him?" "Yesterday," I said. "He gave me a lead. Box 47C in Houston. He's the reason I found the relocation files." "So you were working this together?" I shook my head. "No, I was working it for someone else, for a little girl who never got to go home." Ramos studied me for a moment. "You sound like someone who doesn't stop even when she should." "Stopping's what got her taken in the first place." He gave a small grunt of respect. "All right, Major, then let's see where this trail goes." When I left the house, the afternoon sun burned bright and merciless. I didn't look back. The sound of the coroner's van door closing was enough. By the time I reached Fort Hood, my phone was buzzing with messages from Brooks. "Matthews's death just hit internal logs. Be careful. Someone's cleaning up loose ends." I didn't reply. I just drove straight to the general's quarters. The guard at the gate didn't question me. Maybe it was the look on my face, or maybe he already knew this wasn't a social visit. General Alden was sitting in his study when I arrived. The light slanted across his desk, catching on the edges of old medals and framed citations. He looked up when I entered. Calm, composed, but his eyes had the hollow focus of a man who's been waiting for bad news too long. "Matthews is dead," I said quietly. He froze, his glass halfway to his lips. "How?" "Pills," I said, "but I don't think it was by choice." He set the glass down slowly, his hand trembling just slightly. "Vance," he whispered. "He knows we're close," I said, "and he's not going to stop. Sir, you're not safe here." A faint, humorless smile crossed his face. "Major, I stopped being safe 20 years ago." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the photograph from the Houston file, the one of Lily clutching her stuffed bear. I laid it on his desk. "I found this. There's proof of the relocation, Vance's signature on every document." He stared at it for a long time, his thumb brushing the corner like it might dissolve under his touch. Then his hand rose to his face, and the sound that escaped him wasn't command or composure. It was grief. Raw, human, unhidden. "My God," he said, voice breaking. "She's alive." I swallowed hard. "We can't be certain, sir, but the trail's warm." He nodded slowly, his shoulders straightening as he pulled himself back together. "Then we follow it. Where does it lead?" "To Washington," I said, "all the way to Vance." His eyes darkened. "Then that's where we'll go." 2 days later, we landed at Andrews Air Force Base under the guise of a logistics audit. Alden's clearance got us through security without questions. But secrecy in Washington is like fog. It looks thick until you reach for it. Captain Brooks met us just outside the Pentagon. Her hair was pulled back, her expression somewhere between disbelief and irritation. "You two are out of your minds," she said. "You realize what happens if you accuse an undersecretary without hard evidence." "I have the evidence," I said, holding up the flash drive. "Signed authorizations, transfer codes, timelines." "And 20 years of silence," Brooks said sharply. "That's what you're fighting against. Men like Vance don't lose. They disappear." "Then it's time someone made him appear," Alden said quietly. We barely got 5 minutes in his office. Vance's workspace was immaculate. flag behind the desk, degrees and commendations arranged in surgical precision. The kind of place where everything was designed to project control. He looked up from a file as we entered, and recognition flickered across his sharp gray eyes.
"Robert," he said smoothly, "I was told you'd retired."
"Not yet," Alden replied, his tone clipped. "I had some unfinished business." Vance's gaze shifted to me. "And you must be Major Collins. I've read your record. Impressive." I ignored the compliment and set the photograph on his desk. "You can start by explaining this." He glanced at it, just a second too long before setting it down. "Pretty girl," he said evenly. "What about her?" "She was relocated under your directive, HVTX Ops." His lips twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. "That program was classified. You have no authority to access those files." "I have all the authority I need," I said, my voice steady. "She was a child, not a classified asset." Vance's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you're meddling with. The world isn't black and white, Major. Sometimes we bury things for a reason." "Then let's unbury them." He stood, towering over his desk, his calm cracking just enough to show what lay beneath. "You think you can threaten me? You'll be stripped of your commission before the week's out." Alden rose too. His voice was low but full of steel. "Try it. But know this, Harold, if my daughter's name appears in one more of your files, I'll drag you before Congress myself." For the first time, fear, or maybe guilt, flickered across Vance's face. "You can't prove anything," he hissed. Alden smiled faintly. "That's the thing about men who hide behind secrets. Eventually, someone shines a light." Vance's voice dropped to a near whisper. "You don't know what you're starting." I met his gaze squarely. "Yes, I do. I'm starting justice." We walked out before he could answer. Outside, the afternoon sun blazed across the marble steps, bright enough to sting the eyes. The general stopped beside me, breathing hard, a tremor in his hand that he tried to hide. "He's cracking," he said quietly. "He knows it's over." "Not yet," I replied, "but soon." That night, I barely slept. I sat in the dim light of the temporary quarters, the sound of distant traffic humming through the window. My phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m. An unknown number. "If you want to find the girl, go to Lake Charles, Louisiana. Ask for Lily Carter. Don't tell Alden. Don't tell anyone." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. It could be a trap, or it could be the lead we'd been waiting for. Either way, I wasn't about to ignore it. By dawn, my bags were packed. I left a single note on Alden's desk. "Trust me, if I'm right, you'll see her soon." The highway stretched south under the rising light. The air thickened with humidity, the world softening into pine and fog. Whatever waited at the end of that road, I was ready to face it, because ghosts stop haunting you once you chase them back into the light. The road to Louisiana unfurled beneath me like a ribbon of damp silver, lined with pines that whispered secrets I didn't want to hear. The air grew heavier the closer I got to the border, humid, thick, and humming with cicadas. My windshield blurred with mist, the kind that looks like smoke if you drive too fast. Somewhere ahead, under that veil of fog and history, waited the truth. The message had been simple, almost cruel in its brevity. Go to Lake Charles. Ask for Lily Carter. Every mile I drove, I repeated it in my head like a mantra, half prayer, half dare. By late morning, the town appeared on the horizon, a cluster of rooftops beside the still expanse of water. Moss Bluff. Quiet, sun-drenched, the kind of place where strangers draw glances before they finish parking. I pulled up by a small lakeside dock where the water rippled under a pale wind. Across the street stood a modest white house with a crooked mailbox. The name printed on it stopped my breath. Carter. I walked the path to the porch, boots crunching over gravel. The air smelled of pine and rain. When I knocked, the door opened just a few inches. A woman in her late 40s peered out. Faded floral robe, kind eyes shadowed by suspicion. "Can I help you?" I hesitated, heart hammering. "Ma'am, I'm looking for someone. Lily Carter." Her face changed, softer, then guarded again. "Who's asking?" "My name's Major Sarah Collins, U.S. Marine Corps," I said gently. I knew her a long time ago. Her fingers tightened on the doorframe. "You're not the first to come here," she said after a pause. "A man came by last year, said he was a lawyer from Washington, asked about her adoption, scared her half to death." "What was his name?" She shook her head. "Never said, but he left fast, like he didn't want anyone to know he'd been here." I took a slow breath. "I'm not here to hurt her, Mrs. Carter. I just need to see her." The woman studied me, her gaze moving from my uniform to my eyes. Something there must have convinced her. The door opened wider. "Come in." The house was warm and smelled of lemon polish and coffee. Photographs lined the walls. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, graduation. A smiling young woman in each one, with light brown curls and eyes the color of a fading summer sky.
Lily. Older now. Confident. Alive.
Mrs. Carter followed my gaze. She's at work, community hospital just outside town.
My throat tightened.
She's a nurse? Physical therapist, helps veterans learn to walk again. A small smile touched her lips. Always had a soft spot for soldiers.
The words hit like a quiet miracle.
Mrs. Carter motioned for me to sit, then poured 2 cups of coffee. She doesn't remember much from before the adoption, she said softly. Bad dreams sometimes. Men in uniforms, a big house with a flag outside. She'd wake up crying, saying someone was calling her Emmy.
The room tilted slightly.
She remembers, I whispered.
Pieces, Mrs. Carter said. Enough to haunt her, not enough to explain why. She set her cup down. You seem like a woman who's carried ghosts of your own, Major. Whatever this is, don't bring her more pain.
I met her gaze. I came to bring her truth. An hour later, I stood in the hallway of Moss Bluff Community Hospital. The scent of antiseptic and lilacs filled the air. My palms were sweating. I asked the receptionist for Lily Carter. She pointed toward the physical therapy wing. When I saw her, the world narrowed to the space between one heartbeat and the next. She stood by the window, sunlight threading through her curls, guiding an older veteran through a balance exercise. Her voice was calm, steady, patient. The same gentle rhythm I remembered from the dormitory when she used to hum to the younger kids to help them sleep. When the session ended, she turned toward me, clipboard in hand. Can I help you? Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. The curve of her chin, the spark behind those blue eyes, the same little crescent-shaped birthmark near her neck. My name's Sarah Collins, I said quietly. We knew each other a long time ago. She frowned slightly. I'm sorry. I don't think I... That's okay, I said. There's a lot you weren't supposed to remember. Her eyes searched mine, confusion flickering into something deeper, fear or recognition she couldn't name. What do you mean? I reached into my jacket and handed her a folded photograph, the one I'd taken from the Houston file. The little girl clutching the stuffed bear. That's you, I said. She stared at it for a long time, her breath catching. Where did you get this? It was part of a government relocation record. You were taken from your real family when you were 6 years old.
She shook her head. No, that's impossible.
Your real name, I said softly, is Emily Alden. The room seemed to fall away. She blinked, eyes glistening. Alden? Your father's a retired Marine general. He's been looking for you for 20 years.
She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. I don't remember any of that.
You wouldn't. They erased it. But the memories, they left traces. The dreams, the flag, the man calling you Emmy.
Tears slipped down her cheeks. Sometimes I see his face, she whispered. Silver hair, blue eyes. I thought it was a dream. I swallowed hard. It wasn't.
We sat together on a bench by the window overlooking the lake. The water outside shimmered, still and glass-like. She clutched the photograph in her hands, staring at it as if afraid it might vanish. Why would anyone do that? She asked, voice barely a whisper. Why take a child?
Power, I said simply. Your father uncovered corruption in the defense contracts. The man he exposed had reach. He couldn't touch your father, so he took what your father loved most.
Her gaze lifted to mine, wet and fierce. And you? Why are you here?
I smiled faintly. Because someone had to finish what he started. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint splash of water against the dock and the distant hum of hospital machines. I want to see him, she said finally, voice shaking. My father. I nodded, pulling out my phone. He'll be on the next flight. By evening, the sun was sliding low behind the trees. The lake burned gold and crimson in the reflection. I waited near the dock as General Alden's car pulled up. He stepped out slowly, his uniform exchanged for a plain gray coat, his movements stiff with tension. When he saw her standing there, Lily, Emily, his face crumpled. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then he whispered her name, barely audible. Emily. She turned, eyes wide. The air between them seemed to hold its breath. Then she ran. He caught her, arms wrapping around her so tightly it looked like he might never let go again. His shoulders shook. Hers did too. I looked everywhere, he said, his voice breaking. Everywhere. I know, she sobbed. I think I always knew. I turned away, giving them their moment. The wind off the lake brushed past, carrying the smell of rain and salt.
Behind me, their voices blended, father and daughter, strangers made family again by the truth that refused to stay buried.
Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, soft and steady, like the water touching the shore. That night, I stood by the window of my motel, watching the reflection of the lake shimmer under the moonlight. My phone buzzed with a message from Brooks. Vance is under investigation. The leaks worked. Stay safe, Collins. You've done enough. But I knew I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because somewhere between justice and peace lies the hardest part of all, learning what to do when you finally win. The weeks that followed felt like waking up inside someone else's life. Headlines appeared like aftershocks, each one shaking loose another layer of silence. Undersecretary Harold Vance resigns amid federal probe. Classified military relocation program exposed. Lost daughter of Marine General found alive. Each story carried pieces of the truth, but none of them captured the cost. They never do. I sat in my on-base quarters one night, a cup of coffee cooling beside me, as the television flickered with coverage of the hearings. The anchor's voice was crisp, detached, announcing what the world now knew. Vance is accused of authorizing the abduction and relocation of a minor in 2006, the daughter of then Major General Robert Alden, in retaliation for an internal corruption investigation. For the first time, Emily's name, her real name, was spoken out loud on national television. Not as a missing child, not as a file number, as a survivor. When I turned off the TV, the silence that followed didn't feel empty, it felt earned. A week later, I drove to the Aldens' home. The house looked different this time, curtains open, laughter faint from somewhere inside. When the door opened, General Alden greeted me with a smile that seemed to come from a place he'd forgotten existed. His posture was straighter, his voice lighter. "Major Collins," he said, warmth threading through his formality. "Come in. There's someone who's been waiting for you." Inside, sunlight filled the living room. The air smelled faintly of coffee and wood polish. Emily sat by the window, sketchbook in hand, curls falling loose around her shoulders. When she looked up and saw me, she stood quickly. "You came," she said, smiling. "I promised I would." She laughed softly, a sound I hadn't realized I'd been waiting to hear. "I've been trying to remember," she said, holding up the sketchbook. "Sometimes I get flashes. The smell of the bass, my mother's voice, the way my father's uniform used to scratch when he hugged me." She smiled through tears. "It's like the memories are coming back one by one, asking permission to stay." "That's how healing works," I said gently. "It doesn't rush, it rebuilds." She nodded. "You know what's strange? I'm not angry anymore. I thought I would be. But when I saw my father, all I felt was home." I smiled. "You've got more courage than most people I know." Her father stepped forward, setting a hand on her shoulder. "She gets that from her mother," he said softly. "Then to me, and maybe a little from you." We talked for hours, about the investigation, about Matthews, about how the truth finally broke free. Alden was cautious, already preparing for the political fallout. "Men like Vance don't fall alone," he said. "Their allies will scramble to rewrite the narrative." "Then make sure your version is the one history remembers," I replied. He smiled faintly. "You sound like Claire. She used to say honor isn't about winning, it's about refusing to look away." Before I left, Emily pressed something into my hand, a small silver pendant, tarnished with age. "They found it in one of my old things," she said. "It's from St. Mary's. I think it was mine." I turned it over. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, EA 2006. Her initials. "Keep it," she said. "You reminded me that truth still matters." The following month, I was summoned to testify before a Senate committee. The chamber was packed. Officials, press, the kind of people who thrive on reputation and ruin. I sat in uniform, ribbons polished, hands steady, heart strangely calm. A senator leaned forward. "Major Collins," he said, "why did you continue your investigation after being ordered to stand down?" I met his gaze. "Because a little girl's life mattered more than my career." A murmur rippled through the room. Another senator asked, "Would you do it again, knowing the risks?" "In a heartbeat," I said, "because justice doesn't serve the system, it serves people." When the session adjourned, I walked out into the sunlight and drew my first unguarded breath in months. The Capitol dome gleamed overhead, bright as forgiveness. That evening, back at my quarters, a package waited at my door. No return address. Inside, a folded note. "For Major Collins, you reminded us that truth has a cost, but also a purpose. Beneath it was a small replica medal engraved with 3 words, "Always faithful." I didn't need to know who sent it. Some messages are meant to be silent.
Months passed. The investigation widened. Vance's allies began to fall, one resignation at a time. Each headline felt less like revenge and more like repair.
I stayed in the Corps, but requested reassignment to the Veterans Outreach Division. Paperwork and hierarchy didn't appeal anymore. I wanted something real, helping Marines transition home, helping them find peace in places where the war had followed them too long.
Every now and then I got letters from Emily, though she signed them Lily Carter Alden now, as if to honor both the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. She wrote about nursing school, about how she was learning to help others heal the way she'd learned to heal herself. Her last letter ended with, "You once told me the truth deserves daylight, even if it burns. You were right, but sunlight also heals."
I pinned that one above my desk.
One summer afternoon, Alden invited me back to Texas. The sky shimmered with heat, and the air smelled of cedar and jet fuel. I found him waiting at the old airfield, dressed in civilian clothes for once. He looked younger, lighter. "Emily's inside," he said, nodding toward the hangar. "She wanted to show you something." Inside sat a restored training aircraft, its metal gleaming beneath the lights. On the side, freshly painted in neat black script, were 3 words, "Honor Line." I froze. "You named it after what you taught us," Emily said, climbing down from the cockpit, grinning. "That there's a line that connects all of us, the line between duty and mercy, between truth and power. We're starting a program for veterans and foster youth, aviation rehab therapy. We're calling it the Honor Line Project."
For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I just pulled her into a hug, holding on tight.
"You built something beautiful," I said.
"You gave us the blueprint," she whispered.
That night, driving back to base, I pulled over by the old memorial wall. The stars burned hard and bright over the Texas plain. I traced the names etched into stone, soldiers who'd fallen in service, battles that would never make headlines. I thought of Matthews, Brooks, Ramos, Alden, of Emily's laughter by the lake, of every soul who'd risk something for the sake of truth.
And I realized something. Revenge had never been the point. It had only been the spark, the small, painful light that started everything that came after.
Justice didn't look like punishment. It looked like a father holding his daughter again. It looked like forgiveness that didn't erase the past but stood tall beside it. It looked like peace. I looked up at the night sky, the stars reflecting faintly off the silver pendant in my hand, and whispered the words I'd lived by, the words that had brought me here.
"Semper Fidelis, always faithful." Then I smiled, because for the first time in years, the ghosts were gone. If you've walked this far with me, if you've followed through the silence and the storm, then maybe you know what I've learned. We can't always undo what's been broken, but we can stand for what's right, even when no one's watching, even when it costs us. Because sometimes the smallest act, opening a box, asking a question, refusing to look away, can bring light to places that have been dark for far too long.
Wherever you are tonight, remember this. Honor isn't the medals we wear, it's the promises we keep. And that's the line worth living for.